The morning felt too still, the kind of silence that hums before a storm. Mara sat at the kitchen table, staring at the chipped rim of her coffee mug, pretending not to hear the footsteps pacing down the hall. Her mother's voice broke the quiet, measured, almost casual. As she said Greg needed her to come on the trip. "Just a weekend," Elaine promised. "You'll stay with the kids." The words dropped like a stone into a still pond. Mara didn't answer at first. She just looked at the sunlight trembling through the curtains, dust floating like ash in the air. It was always like this, her mother asking, expecting, assuming. She was the one who held things together. But this time, something in her resisted. When she finally said no, it was barely more than a whisper. Yet, it echoed down the hallway, sharp as glass, setting off the chain of truths that would undo them all. Elaine's heels clicked sharply against the tile as she crossed the room, each step heavier than the last. "You've always watched them," she said, her tone sharp enough to cut through the silence. Mara's stomach twisted. This wasn't a request. It never was. It was an expectation dressed as kindness. Her mother's perfume lingered in the air, the same scent Mara used to find comforting. Now it made her dizzy. She glanced at the clock, counting the seconds between words, between breaths. "I have plans," Mara finally said, but it felt childish against Elaine's quiet fury. The moment hung between them like a cracked mirror, both their reflections splintering. Greg entered mid-argument, his voice thick with that rehearsed calm he wore whenever things got messy. He smiled, too easily, and placed a hand on Elaine's shoulder as if that would steady her. "She's family," he said to Mara, using the word like a command. Mara met his gaze and saw the flicker of irritation beneath his smile, the same one he used when the kids were too loud. Her pulse quickened. The room was suddenly too small, too bright. The walls seemed to listen. "I'm not their parent," she said, and Greg's expression hardened just enough to make her wonder if she'd said something dangerous. Upstairs, the children listened. Lila's small hands clutched Owen's arm, her wide eyes searching his face for reassurance he didn't have. The murmur of voices from below sounded like thunder under the floorboards. Owen whispered that everything was fine, but even he didn't believe it. The house felt like a secret they weren't meant to hear. Lila's doll lay between them, face down on the rug, a single braid undone. Downstairs, a door slammed. The sound made both of them flinch. That night, Mara lay awake, the house pulsing with uneasy quiet. The ocean outside crashed against the cliffs like a warning, its rhythm matching the unrest in her chest. From her room, she could hear Greg and Elaine talking in low, urgent tones. Words she couldn't make out, but felt all the same. Her phone buzzed with messages from friends she hadn't seen in weeks, invitations to escape, to breathe. But she stayed, as always, tethered to duty. In the dark, she whispered to herself that saying no shouldn't feel like betrayal. Yet, somehow, it already did. Morning came heavy and gray. The sound of rain against the kitchen window seemed to fill every pause between words. Elaine moved around the room with mechanical precision, pouring coffee, avoiding eye contact. Greg scrolled through his phone at the table, pretending not to notice Mara's quiet presence by the doorway. It felt like they were strangers in someone else's home. "We can't keep doing this," Mara said softly, though she wasn't sure which of them she meant. Greg's eyes flicked up, sharp for just a second. Elaine didn't look at her at all. The clink of the spoon against porcelain was the only reply. The rain didn't stop all afternoon. The kids played quietly in the living room, but the house hummed with tension that even laughter couldn't drown out. Mara watched Lila sketch flowers on the fogged window while Owen built towers from old cereal boxes. It should have been peaceful, but her mind kept circling the same thought. How easily her mother and Greg assumed her role. How little they saw her own exhaustion. She wasn't angry at the children. She was angry at the years of being expected to be the adult before she'd ever had the chance to be young. That evening, Greg called Mara into his office, a narrow room filled with the smell of paper and stale air. "You embarrassed your mother this morning," he said, voice low and deliberate. He didn't shout. Greg never needed to. His disappointment was quieter, heavier. Mara stood by the doorway, unwilling to step farther inside. The lamplight carved his face into two halves, calm and control on one side, something darker on the other. When he said, "You owe her," it didn't sound like advice. It sounded like a threat wrapped in civility. Elaine found her daughter afterward, sitting on the porch steps, rain dripping from the roof above. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, in that careful voice she used when she wanted control, she murmured, "You know how much he's done for us." Mara stared at the gravel, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "For you," she corrected. Elaine flinched like she'd been struck, then tried to smile, but her eyes betrayed her. The rain softened into mist, carrying the smell of salt and regret through the air between them. That night, Mara couldn't sleep again. Down the hall, she heard Greg's voice through her mother's closed door. Angry, hushed, urgent. The rhythm of it made her skin crawl. Then she heard her mother crying. Not loud, but the kind of quiet sob that sounds practiced. Mara pressed her pillow over her ears, but it didn't block out the truth building in her chest. Something was wrong in this house, something that had nothing to do with babysitting. When she finally drifted into uneasy sleep, she dreamt of walls splitting open and the sea rushing in. The next morning smelled like salt and burnt toast. Greg was gone before sunrise, leaving his half-finished coffee beside the sink. Elaine moved through the kitchen as if she were underwater, slow, distant, eyes red. Mara watched her mother stir sugar into her cup, pretending not to notice the faint tremor in her hand. "He's just stressed," Elaine murmured, but the words rang hollow. There was something else in her tone, something close to fear. Mara didn't press, though her stomach twisted with questions she didn't want to ask. The sea roared faintly beyond the window, restless, as if it knew what was coming. Later that day, Mara walked the cliffs behind their house, the wind cold against her face. She needed distance from the house, from the lies breathing inside its walls. Her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. The preview read, "He hasn't changed." Her breath caught. No name. Just those words. She looked out over the churning sea, the horizon blurred between storm and sky. Every instinct told her to delete it, to pretend she hadn't seen it. But she didn't. She just stood there, heart pounding, as the waves crashed like the truth trying to break through. That night, Jenna arrived. Mara opened the door to find the woman from Greg's photos standing on their porch, soaked from the rain, her eyes rimmed red with exhaustion. "I need to talk to your mother," Jenna said quietly, though her gaze never left Mara's face. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt. She'd seen Jenna only in passing mentions, always painted as bitter, unstable, jealous. But the woman standing before her looked more haunted than hateful. Behind her, thunder rolled across the water. "It's about the children," Jenna added, and the sound of her own words broke her. The conversation unfolded in fragments at the kitchen table. Elaine tried to hold her composure, her fingers laced tightly around her mug. But Jenna's words cut through every defense. "He's been calling me," Jenna said, "for months." The silence afterward was unbearable. Greg had promised both women different lives, stitched together with lies. Mara sat frozen, watching her mother's face pale under the kitchen light. The air tasted metallic, like rain on rust. Somewhere upstairs, Lila laughed, innocent, unaware, and the sound made all three women flinch. When Greg returned that evening, the house felt like a stage already set for confession. He saw Jenna's coat on the chair before he saw her face. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice low, almost calm. But his eyes were wild. Elaine stood beside the counter, trembling, her breath shallow. Mara stepped forward before she realized she had moved. "She knows," Mara said. 3 words that ended everything. For a moment, Greg looked at her like a stranger. Then, slowly, his face collapsed. Not in guilt, but in fear. The kind that knows what comes next. The silence after Mara's words was unbearable. Greg's expression hardened into something she'd never seen before. Cold, almost hollow. Elaine stepped closer to him, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Is it true?" He didn't answer. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, counting down the seconds before the world came apart. Jenna stared at the floor, tears slipping soundlessly down her face. "You told me it was over," she said. Greg's jaw tightened. "It was," he muttered, but no one believed him. The storm outside raged against the windows, and the house seemed to breathe with it. Walls creaking, floorboards shifting, truth pressing in from all sides. Elaine's composure shattered. "How long?" she demanded, voice rising in pitch until it cracked. Greg tried to speak, but Elaine's hand came down on the table with such force the dishes rattled. "Don't lie to me," she hissed. The years of practiced grace were gone. What remained was raw, desperate fury. Mara watched, frozen between wanting to protect her mother and wanting to disappear. "It never stopped," Jenna whispered. The words landed like a blade. For a moment, even the rain went silent. Then Elaine laughed, bitter, broken. "I should have known," she said. "Everyone always said he couldn't change." Greg reached for Elaine, but she recoiled like his touch burned. "Don't," she said. Her voice was quiet now, emptied of anger, replaced by something far heavier. Mara could barely breathe. She had seen arguments before, but not this. The unraveling of everything that had pretended to be love. "I did it for us," Greg said weakly. Elaine's laugh was a sharp exhale of disbelief. "You did it for yourself." Outside, thunder cracked over the cliffs. The house shook. And for the first time, Greg looked afraid, not of losing them, but of what they now knew. Lila appeared at the doorway then, clutching her stuffed bear, eyes wide with confusion. "Why is everyone yelling?" she asked. The sound of her small voice froze them all. Owen followed, his hand protectively on her shoulder, his expression uncertain but older than it should have been. Mara knelt to meet their gaze, her throat tight. "It's okay," she said softly, though nothing about this was okay. Behind her, Elaine turned away, covering her face. Greg looked at his children, and for the briefest moment, regret softened him. But it was too late. The night broke apart in fragments, voices raised, doors slamming, footsteps thundering through the house. Jenna left first, coat half-buttoned, sobbing as the rain swallowed her figure outside. Elaine locked herself in the bedroom. Greg stayed downstairs, staring out at the sea through the glass door, his reflection fractured by raindrops. Mara lingered on the staircase, feeling the house exhale after years of holding its breath. The storm began to fade, leaving only the echo of what had been said. Somewhere upstairs, a picture frame fell, glass shattering softly on the floor, like a final punctuation to the truth. Morning crept in gray and quiet, carrying the hollow stillness of a house that had been screamed empty. Mara sat at the table again, the same chipped mug before her, but everything else had changed. Elaine hadn't come downstairs. Greg's car was gone. The children were still asleep, unaware of how the world beneath them had shifted. Mara traced the rim of her mug, the silence pressing on her chest like weight. For years she'd been the glue in a home built on cracks, and now she wondered if letting it fall apart was the only honest thing she'd ever done. Upstairs, Elaine finally emerged, pale and unsteady. Her robe clutched tightly around her like armor. She didn't look at Mara when she entered the kitchen. "He's gone," she said simply, voice barely audible. "He took his things." Mara nodded, unsure whether to comfort or congratulate her. The silence that followed wasn't relief. It was mourning for the illusion they'd all lived inside. "What do we tell the kids?" Elaine asked, her voice trembling. Mara stared into her mother's reflection in the window, realizing she didn't have an answer that wouldn't break them further. Later, Mara found Lila and Owen sitting together on the couch, the television flickering wordless cartoons. "Where's Dad?" Owen asked, his voice quiet but steady. Mara hesitated, then sat beside them. "He needed to go away for a while," she said, knowing it was only half a lie. Lila leaned against her shoulder, clutching her stuffed bear, eyes glossy but dry. "Will he come back?" she whispered. Mara didn't answer. The sound of rain outside returned, softer now, like a memory refusing to fade. For the first time, Mara held them not as their keeper, but as someone learning to forgive herself. That afternoon, Elaine packed Greg's remaining things into boxes. She didn't cry this time. Her movements were precise, methodical, as though she could fold away the memories along with the shirts. Mara stood in the doorway, watching. "I should have seen it," Elaine said quietly. "I think I didn't want to." Mara stepped closer, took a box from her hands. For the first time in years, Elaine didn't argue. They worked side by side, wordless, the sound of tape peeling and cardboard folding marking the rhythm of their quiet truce. As dusk settled, Mara stepped outside, the air carrying the scent of rain and salt. The sea below was calm again, its restless violence gone. She thought about the years she'd spent trying to fix people who didn't want to be saved. The way silence had always been easier than truth. Behind her, light spilled from the windows, Elaine moving through the kitchen, the children laughing faintly upstairs. It wasn't peace. Not yet. But it was something close. For the first time, the house didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a place that might learn to heal. 3 days passed before Greg called. The phone rang once, twice, then fell silent, leaving only the faint buzz of the disconnected line. Elaine stared at the phone long after it stopped, as if waiting for it to explain itself. Mara watched from the kitchen doorway, her chest tightening at the sight. Elaine finally whispered, "He's staying with her." There was no anger in her voice, only a hollow resignation, like the echo of a door closing far away. Mara stepped forward but said nothing. Some truths didn't need to be spoken to be real. They just settled into the air and stayed there. That night, Elaine sat by the window, watching the ocean swallow the last of the sun. "You remind me of him sometimes," she said softly, not looking at Mara. The words stung more than Mara expected. "Not in what you do," Elaine added quickly. "In what you carry." The air between them thickened with memories neither wanted to claim. "I thought loving him would make me stronger," Elaine whispered. "It only made me smaller." Mara crossed the room and placed a hand on her mother's shoulder. "Then let's start over," she said. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something close. The next morning, Mara drove the children to school. The road curved along the cliffs, the sky washed in pale blue and gold. Lila hummed softly in the back seat. Owen stared out the window, sketchbook on his knees. "Are you okay?" Mara asked him. He shrugged, eyes still on the sea. "I just don't get why people stop loving each other." The question lingered between them like fog. "Sometimes they don't stop," Mara said quietly. "They just forget how." Owen nodded, understanding more than a child should. The sound of the ocean followed them all the way to town. That evening, a letter arrived. Greg's handwriting on the envelope, familiar and foreign all at once. Elaine sat at the table, fingers trembling as she opened it. He wrote about mistakes, about weakness, about how he never meant to hurt anyone. There was no apology that could fix what had been done, only the faint ache of regret bleeding through every word. Mara read it after her mother was done. When she finished, she folded the letter neatly, placed it back in the envelope, and set it on the counter. "Some people only say sorry when they're gone," she said quietly. That night, the house finally felt still. Mara stood outside again, the wind gentler now, carrying only the faint sound of waves. Inside, Elaine was tucking the children into bed. The laughter that drifted from upstairs was small but real. For the first time in months, Maura let herself smile. The horizon glowed faintly under the moon, and she whispered to the dark, We'll be okay." The words felt fragile but alive. They didn't erase the past, but they built something new in its place. A promise that, this time, the silence wouldn't win. Weeks passed. The world didn't end. It just changed shape. The house settled into a quieter rhythm. The air no longer carried the sharpness of secrets. Elaine took long walks by the shore, her posture straighter each day. Maura found work at a local cafe, the kind that smelled like vanilla and rain. When she came home, the children ran to greet her, their laughter echoing through the halls that once knew only arguments. It wasn't perfect. It never would be, but it was real. And maybe, Maura thought, that was enough. One evening, Elaine asked Maura to sit with her on the porch. The sky was streaked with violet and amber. "I kept you in that house too long," Elaine said, her voice steady but thick with regret. Maura looked at her mother, really looked, and saw not just the woman who had failed her, but the one still trying to make it right. "We both stayed too long," Maura said softly. The ocean murmured below them, pulling and returning like forgiveness. Slow, imperfect, but constant. For the first time, they sat together without needing to fill the silence. Months later, Greg showed up one last time. He stood by the gate, unshaven and thinner, holding a small wrapped box. Elaine didn't move to greet him. Maura opened the door instead. "You shouldn't have come," she said quietly. Greg's eyes flicked past her toward the laughter spilling from inside. "I just wanted to see them," he murmured. Maura hesitated, then shook her head. "Not today." For the first time, he didn't argue. He just nodded, left the box on the porch, and walked away down the long gravel road, his figure shrinking into the fog. That night, Maura unwrapped the box. Inside was a drawing, Owen's from months ago, carefully folded and returned. It was a sketch of their family on the beach, smiling, everyone still together. At the bottom, Greg had written, "Keep this safe. It's the best thing I ever had." Maura's throat tightened, not from pity but from understanding. She didn't forgive him, not really, but she no longer hated him either. She placed the drawing on the mantel next to a seashell Lila had found that morning. Some memories, she thought, didn't need to be erased to stop hurting. On the final day of summer, the four of them walked down to the shore together. Elaine, Maura, Owen, and Lila. The wind was gentle, the tide low, the horizon endless. Elaine laughed when a wave caught her skirt. The children chased gulls until they vanished into sunlight. Maura stood at the water's edge, toes sinking into cool sand, the sound of their laughter behind her. For the first time, she didn't feel like the adult holding the world together. She felt like someone finally learning to live inside her own life. The sea stretched before her, open, forgiving, infinite.